Hey, and welcome to TBD, a podcast dedicated to the way people choose to live their lives. We try to take a look into lifestyles ranging from minimalism to veganism and all the weird isms in between. We'll see how looking at these odd ways of living might just be able to teach us something worthwhile. Welcome.
Well, this is our revamp.
Hey.
Did you like that? This is our comeback kid moment. Okay, well, I was talking, but it's cool.
Yeah, sorry.
This is our comeback kid moment, as I was saying.
Yeah, we like podcasts more than we like YouTube, I guess.
No, we still like YouTube, but we want to try a podcast, too.
Yeah, we just want to make stuff.
We just like making content, and we want it to be cool.
Yeah, and we felt like a podcast would suit us.
Yes, I think it does.
I think it does, too. I've been listening to new podcasts. Well,
are you going to tell me about them?
I can. I'm thinking in the structure of our show.
Yeah.
Which there really is none right now.
Not yet, but we'll figure it out.
It would be cool at the end to just talk about
podcasts we like?
Anything.
Oh, okay, we're going to do it at the end.
Maybe, not necessarily. We could just do it whenever, but I like the idea of it being like a segment of like
whatever we want.
What do you like this week? What have you listened to? What was cool? What was
Okay, cool. So let's do it. So we'll start out talking about what we actually came here to talk about, and then we'll digress.
Right.
Cool. I like that plan. That's a good structure.
I like it. So, speaking of what we're here to talk about, what were we here to talk about this week, Lauren?
Today we want to talk about our experience with minimalism.
Is that right?
Yeah. Is that wrong?
Yep. Definitely not what we were here to talk about.
Text me the schedule. What were we supposed to talk about? I thought minimalism was first week.
I'm so triggered. No.
What?
March 7th. Tiny house.
I meant tiny houses is what we're talking
about.
March
14th. Minimalism.
Okay, so stay tuned because next week we'll talk about minimalism.
I mean, we could talk about minimalism.
I'm absolutely.
Well, it sounds like you're very prepared for the tiny house talk, so.
I am prepared for tiny house talk.
How have you prepared this week?
In fact, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos of people making their own tiny houses and creating RVs into tiny houses, which I think is pretty cool.
I do too.
And I want to make my own tiny house. But then I also don't.
Oh. So this is just you didn't do anything in particular, just watching like the tubes?
Yeah, I know a lot about tiny houses. I like tiny houses that are really aesthetically pleasing.
Like the expensive ones.
Well, yeah, but also the ones that are like very like clean lines, modern looking, but also like really innovatively cool. Mm-hmm. Like ones that have like storage.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
What I find super interesting about tiny houses is a lot of them are designed by architects because it's like a cool new project people can do. And so like they bring in their really weird design ideas and pack things in really efficiently.
I think it's cool because they like engineer every corner. Like there's nothing that's not efficient. It's very like IKEA / like modern design. I even actually saw some YouTube videos of like students who just like built their own as like a school project. Like it's so chill that you can just do it yourself if you feel like it.
I saw a kid who built basically his own home, which was very nice, for $15,000.
Yeah.
And he was in college. He lived in an apartment for a year and he was like, I'm not about paying
Forget this. Yeah.
So he took his savings and he was going to be an accountant, so he saved all of his receipts. So it was exactly like $15,200 some dollars. Exactly.
Exactly, because he's an accountant.
Right, which was really cool. And it was nice. I mean, he had a cool setup, and I don't know. I thought it was pretty neat. I like that you're able to, on a budget, make a nicer home.
I like the idea behind tiny houses too, like the travel, like wanderlust kind of part of it is what I like, that you can like move it around. But the practicality of that, like I feel like a lot of people just park their tiny houses from what I was watching.
Oh yeah.
Like people don't like adventure with their tiny house.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of tiny houses kind of come out of a need for like financial
Yeah.
things.
But some people do it because they want to travel. Like, I think that some people have like a
Mm-hmm.
house and then a tiny house, and they take their tiny house on like year-long adventures and go places.
That's true. And I don't know if one thing that I found interesting, so I listened to this TED Talk,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy, him and his wife had lived in decently sized homes. They were pretty regular, normal people.
Yeah.
And then they decided to build a $30,000 home. They
Yeah.
paid cash, and they don't have payments anymore.
They sold their normal house, you're saying?
They moved into this home.
Yeah,
So they sold their
full-time.
house. They paid cash for this $30,000.
And now they don't
And,
have
and
a
it's
mortgage.
immaculate.
Of
It
course,
is,
yeah.
It is.
Well, $30,000 for a tiny house is like a
It's
nice
amazing.
tiny
You're
house.
right. And they live there with their daughter, and like it's a home. I don't
Yeah.
think it's mobile. I think it's just a tiny home.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting was it was less like we want to travel, so tiny home, but more of we have a
don't-
tiny home. We don't have a house payment.
Yeah, we don't
which
want a
was
mortgage
taking up
payment.
25-30% of my
Income.
monthly income
Yeah.
is now freed up.
Yeah.
I can take time off work. I can take a job that allows me to.
Yeah.
So it's more of a, I think, coming from a place of financial freedom and not. I think what I came
Mm-hmm.
away from with this whole tiny house movement thing was it was less about. I don't know. I think
It's
it
less about the adventure side of it and the less about the like fun tiny house side of it versus like the like reducing
practicality.
Yeah, because sometimes it's like crazy
Mm-hmm.
that people are spending so much of their income on like a living situation and then they're not able to like save or do anything else.
Yeah, and it's
When in reality you don't even have to have a mortgage payment.
right.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the mentality. Is it's very counterculture, very much like not consumerism.
Yeah.
It's a financial freedom, and then just time that frees you to be
Yeah.
more of yourself.
I think I would be more likely to get a tiny house if I lived in a different place because being in Michigan where you're snowed in 6 months out of the year, I would go insane in a tiny house. But people who live in like a warm climate, I would 100% get a tiny house in 2 seconds because I feel like when you can open all these doors and windows and live on like a plot of land in your tiny house, like that's what I would do. I would buy a huge plot of land where I can let all my bazillion dogs run, and then I would have my little tiny house, but you just like don't really stay there. You just sleep there, and
Yeah, that was another
that
point.
would be what I would do.
That was another point he was making was, the average American works 8.5 hours a day
Yeah,
plus. So let's say 9 hours. Both of us probably work 9
at
hours
least
a day.
9 hours.
And then on average, the average American sleeps 9 hours a night. I probably get 8 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah, I get about 8.
So that leaves you with, am I doing the math right? 5 hours ish. Am I doing that right?
8 plus 8. Well, yeah, 9 plus 8 is
Mm-hmm.
17. There's 24 hours in a day, so that leaves you another like 7.
7 hours. But okay, 7 hours in your home a day.
I feel like that can't even be right.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. Wait.
9 hours at work, 8 hours during the day. That's 17 hours. There's
8 hours at night. So the average, I think what he did, yikes. What he did was said the average American sleeps 9 hours a night, and the average American is working. I think,
10-hour days?
oh, he included
plus commuting.
He included commute.
So 10 hours.
So 10-hour days, 18 hours
Because
out of your day.
I work an 8-hour day, but I take a 30-minute lunch, so that adds on 30 minutes.
Right.
Plus I commute at least 45 minutes to work each way.
Right.
So that's an hour and a half plus my 30-minute lunch, which adds 2 hours to my 8-hour day, which is 10 hours I'm spending commuting, working, eating lunch, all of that. And that's, so 10 hours plus your 9 hours where you're sleeping, that's 19. You get 5 hours.
That's what he said. Well, okay. His ultimate point was you spend very little, 6 to 4 hours a day in your home.
In your actual house.
And he said, I hope that you're spending the time in your home worthwhile. Hopefully you're not like spending a few hours cleaning your home every day.
Well, you are,
Right.
100%. Cleaning,
And his point
paying
was,
bills.
if him and his wife cleaned the house top to bottom as clean as it can get, he's like, it might take me 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Compared to most people. So, it's just an interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah. It made me really, I mean, I get this way when I hyper focus on something. I want to, like, my first thought was I could do that. Like, I could actually, the huge appeal to me is like a lack of debt, being able to, I could own a home.
Yeah, and have no debt.
And have no debt.
And then owe nothing on it.
And owe nothing. And then at that point, that gives me a lot of financial freedom to do what I want to do.
Or to save for something else, too. Like, if eventually down the road you want to have a house or, like, more space or more land
or a larger
something.
home if I wanted to. I mean, I don't know the specifications of it all, but.
But you could save up. Because some people get stuck in this, like, living in an apartment and having an apartment payment, like a rent payment every month, and then they can't save enough to buy a house. And that's what I was watching this YouTube video about it, this student who built it for a school project but then ended up living in it for like 5 years and then eventually had enough savings to buy a house or whatever she wanted, and just buy like more land was her focus too. Which I totally get, and I'm all on board with a tiny house, but I feel like I'd be the person who has a house plus a tiny house, which is really annoying, but I would use it for travel. Like it would just be something that I could use to go other places. Because
right, but then what would the necessity be for a home? Like if you're going to be
that's true, like but it's cheaper to travel in your own home than it would be to travel like taking an airplane, staying in a hotel.
Yeah.
It'd still be cheaper, and it'd be more like chill. Like if you could, take a little hiatus from work and take like a year off and go travel the country or whatever, that'd be cool.
In that case, definitely. And that sort of ties in with like the whole van life.
Yeah, which I'm still kind of on board with too. I think it's cool.
I prefer the tiny home stuff because I think the van setup, unless you have a very, very nice one that's very decked out, like I just think it's very cramped and
I like to cook, and I like to like have my own
have a home,
like a shower and like things that I don't want to have to be like looking for showers and stuff like that. Like I would like to have a place that you can go home to. I don't know. I'm on board with the tiny house, but my life now is like not gonna work for a tiny house. Like I have big dogs. Like what do you do with big dogs in a tiny house?
Right.
You'd have to be on land.
That's what I was gonna say. You'd have to just let them be outdoor dogs and let them roam.
Yeah, and be able to let them come inside, but like at the end of the day, after they've worn themselves out. Like my dogs like to wrestle in the kitchen, and that just like would not be an option in a tiny house.
Right. But that would be the other side of the coin would be you'd have land to let them run.
That's why I was falling down the hole of turning RVs into tiny homes because I can like that makes more sense in my brain. Like people own RVs for travel.
Sure.
Or you could make it more of a tiny home setup, a little bit more like luxurious than an RV.
Right. I think there's a difference though between tiny house and like mobility. Like there are tiny homes that are just small houses
and set in a place.
Right. They're on a piece of land and you're not moving that.
I feel like the ultimate thing about tiny houses is you have to build it for what you're looking for out of it. Like they can be so customizable to like whatever your life is that the cool thing about tiny houses is you're literally building them from scratch, and you're building them to fit the lifestyle that you want. So whether that's travel or whether that's just reducing your payments or whether that's just like
escapism from
or like tying in with minimalism or like zero waste or like there are so many tiny grids or tiny houses that are off the grid. Like it just depends on what you're looking for. Like I feel like tiny house is such a broad spectrum.
Yeah, and that's true. I think when I think of tiny houses, I think mainly of small homes that are generally, for the most part, they may be mobile, but they stay at a spot for majority of the year.
Yeah.
Because I think in my mind, I designate like RV living to
something different,
to the mobile side of things.
Yeah.
Like if I had like a remote job, if I were able to work remotely and stay at home, if I were working for myself, have my own whatever business, then I could in theory do the whole van life thing. But
moving your tiny house and working from wherever.
Wherever. I mean, I could be in Phoenix and still right. But I think the thing is if you have a 9-to-5 or you have a job that does require you locally or something, then I see that as tiny house.
Yeah. I think tiny houses are real cool. And one thing that I've learned too, backstory on Lauren, is I own a house, but not a tiny house, a normal sized house. Not a huge house. I mean, it's kind of a smaller, normal sized house.
It's a nice house.
Yeah, but it's not like huge. It doesn't have excess room or
You don't
whatever.
have a mansion.
No.
But it's a I'd say an average American home.
Yeah. But when I first moved in, coming from the house that we grew up in, I was like, this is so small. I'm going to eventually grow out of this house.
I'm ready to move out when I...
Right. Or like when we have kids, this is going to be way too small for me. But like it's not at all. No. And like learning about tiny houses and stuff, I would be comfortable having a ton of kids or a ton of dogs in this house. And I feel like tiny can be kind of a perspective thing too, and like living more in close quarters with a lot of people in like a medium-sized house.
Yeah.
That is also interesting.
Yeah, and that was one of the other things that this guy in the TED Talk kind of talked about. His first pitch was more of a practicality, financial, but in the end it ended up being a lot about interpersonal relationships and like finding yourself more and being able to free yourself from financial burden and debt and all of those things. But he told a story of how his daughter had a fight with him and she went to her room and slammed the curtain. And he was laughing about it, but he said, like, I couldn't just sit in that space and just let her do her thing.
You had to talk about it. You had to have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Which sounds weird, but that in the end led them to having a conversation which helped them resolve things. Whereas in a home, when someone slams the door, they're easy to forget.
Literally removed from the situation because you're so far removed from one another. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And I think that goes into like even like a bigger concept of like reducing and like bring like just a different lifestyle. Like it's a lifestyle that you're forcing by living in a tiny house, but you could still in theory focus on that in a medium or a big size house. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like the principle of why people do it is what's interesting.
Yeah, sort of side note, but I've been listening to a lot of like minimalists talk and doing interviews and things, and this one minimalist guy who has a podcast that I'm probably going to shout out at the end of this because I like it a lot.
Yeah.
He had this girl on, and she said something along the lines of, "I'm not a minimalist, but a lot of the principles that I see in minimalism, I try to uphold myself."
That's interesting.
I don't get to the point where I'm like just getting rid of a lot of stuff, but it's more about the intentionality of things.
Yeah.
And I think, like what you're saying, like for tiny homes, for example, it's less about the actual size of your home
and more about the intention of it. Like it's about forcing yourself to leave your house and do things or sit in a room with people and have a conversation and cook together and use less and focus more on the living your life than maintaining your, what is it called? You maintaining your stuff, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also like the ever evolving, like bigger, better kind of mentality.
And like getting yourself out of the mentality of like needing, okay, once we pay off this house, let's get a bigger one. Or like once we, pay off this car, let's get a new one. It's forcing yourself into a mentality, which is probably easier to live like that when you're not surrounded by like junk or space or all of those other things. But I think that understanding other people living that way can influence
it can help for sure
people who are living like, I'm not a minimalist, but I'm taking in those ideals, or don't live in a tiny house, but I'm trying to focus on bringing those ideas into my medium-sized house.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like a good takeaway from all of this stuff is like it doesn't, I think on a very practical level it's a little more difficult, like reducing your housing payment. Like that's not going to happen if you live in a medium-sized house.
But it depends on what you want to do.
That's true. Yeah, right. And I think kind of tying back to what you said about the kind of house that you build, like it can kind of cater to what you actually want. Like some people are looking for whatever, fill in the blank. But
right. Like, or if somebody's looking for an off-grid house, they may spend a ton of money on like solar panels and the coolest everything.
Right.
And that might be what they want.
They need to
and that's
escape.
fulfilling to them to have like a very like eco-friendly house. That's awesome. That's cool. And that's what you can build with a tiny house.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like medium-sized houses, or if you're just buying into the housing industry, like it's pretty cookie cutter and you're going to get what you're going to get. Like you can't really customize your house if you're not, and not a lot of people can just build a new normal size house. But it's easier to build a custom tiny house, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, well, I know we sort of mentioned it, like, would you do it? I mean, would you?
I think I would.
What would be the circumstances in which that you do it? I know you said you wanted to live somewhere that's warmer.
Yeah.
Michigan
I would have to live someplace warmer. I would need land because I'm not willing to give up all of my big animals. So I'd need to have land and space, and it would have to be warm enough that I would feel like comfortable having that situation going on. I think that those would be the two main things.
What about work?
Well, I have the ability to work remote. So that doesn't play a huge factor into my decision.
Okay.
But my work is pretty like flexible. So I think that I could get away with. But I think if I lived in a tiny house, I probably wouldn't have to be the second income anymore if we lived in a tiny house. So I could probably pursue things that are more like that I would make less money doing, but that are more fun to me than working like a 9-to-5.
Sure.
Which would be interesting.
Would it be more along the lines of you needed the perfect storm of things to happen for you to get a tiny house, or would you intentionally pursue those things in order to? I mean, I'm not saying that tiny houses is your end game.
I think I would. I think that I would pursue a tiny house. And there has been times where I've really considered it and like thought about it and like talked about it. But I don't know. I feel like something would have to push me into it a little bit, like how people were saying, like financial issues or something pushes them to make that step, because it is kind of scary to be like, okay, I'm going to go from my normal size house, especially from my perspective where like I already have a house and I would be downsizing and I would have to like change a lot of things about my life. Whereas like you not having any place that you're like tied down to, it'd be so much easier to commit because you'd be like, sweet, now I have a place.
Yeah, owning a home sounds pretty freaking cool.
Right. And me owning a home and feeling like I would have to like downsize.
Change your lifestyle.
Yeah, it would be more challenging, I feel like, to go backwards than it would be like to invest in it right up front.
And that's such I think a psychological thing too, is like having something and having to get less back.
Yeah.
That's
which I know
difficult.
that I would have less stuff, but I would definitely get more out of it. But I think the process would be interesting. I don't know. It's something that I would definitely do and I would be on board with.
Yeah.
But I can see you doing it more than me. Like I feel like you would do it, no questions asked. And I honestly think that you should too, because if you built or bought a tiny house, you invest into it for whatever, a couple of years, even if you save some money and just like use it as a tiny house for a little while and then sell it and have that saved up money, it'd be a cool experience. Worst case scenario, you end up just selling it and finding a more different place to live. But I honestly think you should. I think the hardest part would be to find a place to put your tiny
finding
house.
the logistics to actually make it a day-to-day home, like where I can park my
where would you park it, and like where would you have it
park
built?
my car. Like I need a place to keep it.
You'd have to buy. I feel like you'd have to buy land and then build a tiny house yourself on it.
So hard to find around here. I mean, it's just straight up city and suburbia around here.
I know. You'd have to go up north a little bit more.
Probably, which means
different
work.
So speaking of tiny houses,
okay,
another video idea that we have is we want to live in a tiny house.
Yes.
We want to do a tiny house experience because we're talking a big game, but neither of us have
never
ever
done it.
even been in a tiny house.
Never. Okay, I have been in one, but I haven't stayed in one.
Stayed in one.
Okay, and so there is one in our
area.
state.
in our area. It's fairly close.
It's not
It's
too
like
far.
a couple hours away.
And we would drive. We're talking about driving up for a weekend and staying
Driving
the
up.
weekend.
Yeah, staying a long weekend in the tiny house and just seeing what happens.
So.
Having a little experience. I feel like if we did that, though, you would 100% get one.
Or I would 100% choose not to.
I highly doubt it.
I don't. Honestly, I'm surprised you think that about me, because I'm very hesitant to even like do anything ever. I'm not a very impulsive.
But it's not a huge commitment.
That's true. And that sounds good to me.
Right. It's not a huge commitment, and you can own a home.
That's true. Plus, who else has a tiny house? That's
Right.
pretty fun.
It's so cool. So I think that we should do like a cool video about our experience in a tiny house and film our weekend and like what our experience is.
Yeah.
I think that'll
so
be
too.
awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So this tiny house that we want to stay in, I think they only rent during the summer,
And the weekends are
is
popping up.
Michigan. Or you could make a tiny house and you could Airbnb it too, because you know how hard
would
it was to
definitely do
find us a tiny house.
Well, so that would be that would be one of the major reasons I want to do it, because I think if I did decide to get a home or something more traditional, then I could just rent it.
It's so cool
owning
too.
property, owning something and being able to rent it out.
And people want to experience it, and it was so hard for us to find one.
Yeah.
It's like not easy to find.
I think there are
tiny.
2 in Michigan that were like available and easy to find for rent. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
more.
But like that,
or at least in the
were
lower,
worth staying in.
Yeah, that looked nice and credible and
Yeah. So that's going to be our plan.
yeah, and we just need to find a weekend. I know that there were a few available that we could book up. So
Yeah, it'll probably have to be during the summer, which
It'll be
is the
later
best
down
time
the
to
line.
do it.
Right.
So we're not cooped up in a tiny house.
Northern
in the middle
Michigan
of
in
winter.
the summer is perfect.
Yeah, and not in the winter. No.
No. But the summers pay off. So.
Cool. All right. Well, we're gonna do it. Before we stop talking about tiny houses, do you have anything else? Any takeaways?
I think it's a cool movement. I like the mentality behind it. I'm all for the the best word I can think of is like spiritual.
Yes.
Like it seems to be a step away from
the craziness of like
yeah.
everyday life.
And I think for me, I like it because it's very much, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's practical, it'll fulfill my needs, and it's not over the top. It's not gonna burden me. So that sounds pretty freaking nice.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a cool idea. I support people who do it, and I would even love to talk to people who do it.
Yeah.
Or hear from people who have lived in or currently are living in a tiny house.
I wonder if we could contact the owner of that tiny house that we're looking at and see if they would be willing to talk about it.
Probably.
I mean, if we went up and stayed there, I wonder if they would be willing to record with us.
Yeah, and say a couple things about like their experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I want to do that. And if anybody's listening to this podcast and they know anybody or they are somebody who is involved in the tiny house community, tell us about your experience, because we're really interested and we're talking a big game even though we don't really have a lot of exposure to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the major points of this podcast is to kind of shed light on weird stuff that isn't very normal and get a different perspective and how it changes people's lives. Like, excuse me. The reason I ask, like, would you do this is like, is this something that would add value to my life? And if so, why am I not already doing it? You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I feel like we'll probably have other topics like that we'll podcast and post to this channel and be able to dive into a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in tiny houses. I think it's cool. A cool concept.
Me too. I'm excited to try it out.
All right, should we get off topic now?
Yes, let's get off topic.
Okay, let's talk about podcasts.
Let's talk about podcasts. Let's talk about Matt D'Avella.
Okay, who's that?
He is a filmmaker.
Okay.
Makes YouTube videos, makes a podcast.
Is he the guy that you showed me last week?
Yes.
Okay.
The guy who made the very cinematic video about his apartment tour.
Yeah.
So
He's
he has a
real
podcast.
artsy.
He's very artsy. He directed the Netflix documentary Minimalism.
Okay.
So he's friends with The Minimalists.
The Minimalists.
And so he shot that. He has a podcast that he's making, and he's posting highlights on his YouTube video and still making videos for himself. His podcast is called The Ground Up Podcast, or The Ground Up Show. I think it's called The Ground Up Podcast. Let me check my podcast app.
Get it right.
The Ground Up Show.
Okay.
It's about bringing on artists and creators of content who are like him in a way. He'll bring on composers, he'll bring on other minimalists, he'll bring on YouTubers, he'll bring on anybody who's making things. And the goal of his show is to create meaningful content with this like mentality of making, get as much content out there as possible. I think he thinks a lot of people are losing sight of like actually putting a message worth sharing into your so he brings on all these artists and just asks them questions, gets to know them, gets to know their work, and generally they all have some sort of like meaning to the art that they're making.
That's cool.
And it's super interesting. It's always really good insights, and they just talk about making stuff.
Cool. Well, I'll listen to it.
And he's got just an interesting personality. I think he's funny. He's not like fun. He's not like haha funny.
But he's like a funny dude.
Yeah, his personality just makes me laugh. Like the videos he makes these very like dry jokes, and it just makes me laugh so hard. I like him a lot, and
cool.
his guests are very insightful and cool. So
cool. I'll listen to it.
I recommend it for sure.
Awesome. Podcast shout out to
Matt D'Avella.
And
that's D, I think apostrophe AVALLA or something like that.
Just use autocorrect.
Yeah, and the Ground Up Show. It's good stuff.
Cool.
What about you? Anything new? Any cool stuff?
Nothing new. Everything old.
My Favorite Murder.
I love that podcast.
It's a great show.
It's so good. I'm pretty much caught up to it. I've pretty much listened to their entire podcast. And
Really?
Yeah. They have like years and years and years of content, and I'm pretty much up to date. So they're amazing. I really want to go to one of their live shows, but they never come to Michigan. So
I know.
My Favorite Murder, if you're listening to this, please come to Michigan.
I would go.
They went to the Fillmore one time.
Oh, no.
I know, but it was before I started listening to them, and I was like, dang it. I would have gone to the Fillmore and watched.
That's such a cool venue, too.
I know. So next time they come to Michigan, I'm going to make you come with me.
I would love to, yeah.
And we're going to watch them in person.
Live shows are so cool to me because I never knew that podcasts did live shows.
Me neither.
Until this year. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of shows that are doing these live shows, and I never would have thought I would go watch a podcast live.
I know.
I'm on board 100%.
Me too. And I feel like some people can do it and some people, like, it's just not for them.
Right.
But, like, for the My Favorite Murder girls, like, I feel like are meant to do live.
They get it.
Yeah. Like, they're comedians and they're just, like,
yeah, they're comedians.
They're used to being on stage,
right.
And it fits them so well. And it's even funny just to watch them like interact with the audience. Like it's so chill and so cool, and they're just like my favorite podcast of all time. So
yeah, this will be a constant not name drop, but just reference
podcast shout out.
My brother and me.
I knew you were gonna say it.
Their live shows are so good. They're an advice podcast,
yeah,
and they'll have the audience come up and share questions, and they just do a very good job of interacting with the audience while still making it feel very much like the show.
Yeah.
Also, if anybody likes that show or is interested, there's a television show they made. You can find it on Verve, and you can watch it all for free. It is so good. I can't even describe. If you're a fan of the show and you haven't watched My Brother and Me, the TV show, you're missing out. It is.
You showed me a little bit of it, and it was so funny.
They're hilarious. They're really funny, and they're just. You get a really good sense of who they are.
Are they all actual brothers?
They're all actual brothers. The three of them and their dad are all a part of this whole network they do, and
that's funny.
Yeah, two of them are theater majors, so being on stage is what they do.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a good show.
So those are our favorite podcasts of the moment.
Yeah,
we'll have more.
I got this new podcast app.
I also started listening to H3H3.
The podcast?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That shocks me.
Why?
You don't strike me as an H3H3 fan.
Well, I'm still getting into it.
He's very interesting.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
It's
a very popular podcast, so I was like, I need to listen to it. And I started, and I was like, okay. And so I'm just going to keep listening to it.
As you get to know Ethan and Hila, you'll like it more and more.
I
They're
feel
very
like-
likable people.
Yeah, I feel like you got to get to know them a little bit.
They're super weird, and
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised you say that.
Really?
Yeah, just because, I mean, they're very weird and very, like, obnoxious on YouTube, and I love it, but
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So I'm getting into that one,
That's
too.
funny, because I used to watch all his YouTube videos, and I've kind of dropped off the H3 train because of the podcast. Not because I don't like it, but just because I don't, like, actively seek out their show.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people they interview are interesting, sometimes they're not interesting to me, so it's just hit
Yeah,
or
it
miss.
depends on the week. Yeah. I
So-
feel like it's one of those podcasts that I'm going to, like, skip around a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, I probably won't listen to them in chronological order like I did with My Favorite Murder.
Same with the Ground Up Show for me. Like, there are interesting guests to me, and then there are some that are like, eh.
Skip it.
Most of them are interesting, but I like read through the bios sometimes as I'm
Yeah,
looking,
and be like, oh, that's up my alley, and
right,
listen
and then
to
I'll-
it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I just got this new podcast app, and it's called Overcast,
Okay.
and it is great.
I usually listen to mine on Spotify.
I did too.
Yeah.
Up until I found this compliments of Matt Diavella, because I watched one of his videos and he told me about it. But honestly, I'm not.
Oh, he told you about it? Just
yeah,
you?
he came out of the
called
computer
you?
and, hey, Drew, check this out. No. he had it on one of his videos and he showed it to the camera, and at first I was like, it's kind of okay, but it actually has every podcast I've ever thought of. One that's only on SoundCloud, one that's only on Spotify, one that's only on their website,
Oh, that's kind of cool.
and it's all on the same app. And what's great about it, this is like a paid. This is
I know,
not a
I was
paid
going to
promotion.
say, are
I
we
just-
promoting Overcast
No,
now?
I just genuinely love this app. It's great. You're able to, let's say you open an episode.
Yeah.
You're able to get the
Read
description.
the bio.
You can do this smart speed where it'll skip little pauses in the audio, so it can condense down a little bit. And then you can voice boost if you're having trouble hearing the audio or the actual voice over whatever audience noises or something like that. And it's just all right there. It's super great. It gives me...
Interesting. Okay, I'll download it.
It actually notified me during recording this podcast that a podcast was just uploaded.
Oh, cool.
So
okay, I'm going to download it.
It's great.
Yeah.
I think you'll love it, and I hope everybody else loves it, but this is not a paid promotion. I just actually think it's a fantastic app.
Unless Overcast.
I will honestly promote you every episode because
Hit us up.
I actually won't anymore, but if you pay me, then... No, I'm just kidding. It's a great app. Check it out.
Cool. All right. Did we successfully do a podcast?
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know. We'll have to
One
listen
way to
it
find out.
back.
One thing... I won't talk anymore. I think we did it.
Talk.
I was just going to say one thing on the podcast that I listened to today, the Ground Up Show. His guest was saying, talking about procrastination and just like, when in doubt, keep posting.
Okay.
Was her motto. Meaning when you listen to it,
And you're
even
like,
if it sucks, even if you're like,
do it.
just post.
So if you're listening to this and it sucked, we just had to post it.
We just had to post it. I'm sorry you had to suffer through all of this, but
I hope somebody likes our podcasting.
I'll like it, so that's mostly why we'll post.
That's true. I really like podcasting, and I still want to post videos, and I still want to post, but I just want to bring more like variety. Like I want to try a podcast. I want to try a really cinematic video. I want to try a vlog style video. Like I just really want to like try a little bit of everything, and eventually we'll figure out what we love to make. But yeah, I think that this podcast is pretty darn cool.
I think so too. My only suggestion, I think, would be to bring on experts. So if
you know how I feel about socializing.
Don't worry, I'll be the one to talk. You
Okay,
can just
great.
hide behind me.
Okay, great.
If anybody out there is an expert on a weird lifestyle,
Yeah,
hit us up.
Something like tiny houses.
We'd love
or
to hear
something
about
else.
it. Yeah. Anything that's kind of counterculture like that a lot of people could learn about, hit us up. We'd love to at least hear your experiences and possibly talk to you about it. And
yeah, maybe even if you email us or make a comment on a YouTube video.
send us a video of yourself talking about
or
it.
a response video or something, and then we can talk about it on our next podcast.
Response videos on YouTube are long gone.
Well, you could still make a video
and
and send
respond.
it to us.
I knew what you meant. But
I'm not saying like a response video.
throwing it back to 2009 or 2010.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. I think that's a podcast.
I think we've done it.
Good job.
High five.
High fives.
All right. Peace out, y'all. Till next time.
It's been real. You can find us on Twitter at TBD_.
The podcast?
Is it underscore the podcast?
Yeah. TBD _ the podcast. Or my YouTube channel.
Or the YouTube channel. We're gonna possibly post on SoundCloud or whatever else podcast apps. We'll link all of that.
Yeah.
But
this first one may just be on YouTube.
Yeah, this is kind of just for.
This is our test run.
Yeah.
If you love podcasts, let us know, and then we're gonna do better.
Both of those.
Right.
Yeah. If you love podcasts in general, tell us. Don't tell us if you didn't like this podcast.
Right. No. We only want to know if you liked us.
Yeah. Okay.
We need positive reinforcement. Thanks so much.
To our viewing audience, if we have one.
If we have one.
All
right. Bye.
Bye. We did it.
We did it!